Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the members. I've had the honor of serving in this House of Representatives for the past 12 years, for the past 6 sessions, and I have voted against expanded gambling at least once in each of those sessions. I'm proud of my consistency. I have developed a view on this issue in consultation, of course, with my constituents, which I believe I was going to say as strongly today as the first time I took that vote, but that would be incorrect. I actually believe it far more strongly. And I'll share with you, when I first got to the legislature, I'm not sure that I had such a clear position one way or the other on expanded gambling. But I engaged in the issue and began to learn and think and read, such that I am deeply opposed to expanded gambling, and I rise in opposition to this conference committee report. But the reason that my opposition has strengthened is because of the research and the studying I've done, and I'd like to share some of that with you today in the hopes that others will vote against this conference committee report. I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. I'm not against gambling. I don't have a problem with horse racing or poker games or roulette wheels. What we're deciding today is about the introduction of slot machines into Massachusetts. The issue for me has been and is about slot machines. Mr. Speaker, last session, I had the honor to serve as the House Chair of the Joint Committee of Mental Health and Substance Abuse. And in that role, I called a hearing, an informational hearing, and invited nationally recognized experts on this topic. And their testimony was extremely persuasive, at least to some of us, about what a slot machine is, what it does, how it works. And I'm going to share with you today what I learned. And I'm actually going to read from the testimony that was delivered at that hearing by Dr. Natasha Schull, an assistant professor at MIT, who submitted testimony. Anyone who's in your office watching this on TV, anyone here who'd like a copy of this testimony, I'd be happy to share it with you. I'm going to read from it, because I think today we are making a very, very serious decision. I didn't catch the number, how many numbers of slot machines we were going to bring in. I know it's several thousands, and I know there's all this fighting about whether they should be at the racetracks or the casinos. 2,000 slot machines total, counting the ones at the casinos? 2,500, that's at the tracks, or that's at the casinos? All right, so we're bringing 25 slot machines. I think it's important that before this vote is taken, people know what a slot machine is and does. So I'm going to read from the testimony of Dr. Natasha Schull. She writes, "My research began in the early 1990s in Las Vegas and concerns the dramatic turn that's taken place in recent decades from social forms of gambling played at tables to asocial forms of gambling played alone at video terminals. Although classic green felt table games or live games dominated casino floors as recently as 20 years ago, today gambling machines are the cash cows, the golden geese, the workhorses of the industry. The president of the American Gaming Association, the commercial lobby that supports the gambling industry, has remarked, it's the slot machine that drives the industry today." Now, Dr. Schull goes on to write, "As a social anthropologist, it fascinated me that gamblers were increasingly playing with machines rather than with each other, and I wanted to understand why. I moved to Las Vegas, where I lived for over 18 months, and spent countless hours observing and speaking with local gamblers, whom she met in casinos, bars, grocery stores, and at Gamblers Anonymous meetings, where over 90% of those in attendance are exclusively video gamblers. To skip some of her statistics, she writes, I learned a number of counterintuitive things during my extended field work among gambling regulars and addicts in Las Vegas. Although people typically think of gambling as an activity that is about fun and excitement, regular and addicted machine gamblers are motivated less by a desire for chance, excitement, or entertainment than by a desire for escape into a dissociative state of continuous flow. Without social element to keep them in check, they are able to exit the world and enter what they call the machine zone, a kind of anesthesia from human concerns that removes them from time, space, a sense of monetary value, or even embodiment. Gambling machines so completely concentrate players' attention on a series of specific game events that anything troubling about their life situation, physically, emotionally, or socially, is blotted out. The aim is not to win, but to keep going. Now, this is really interesting. Winning not only stops mattering, but actually becomes undesirable, for it interrupts the flow of play. As one gambler told this researcher, it may start out being about the winning, but that's just a drive-in to something else. A gambling addict who wins does not get up and go. One woman told the researcher that the dread she felt on hitting a jackpot at 4 a.m. one morning, now I have to sit here for 2 more hours until it's gone. As gambling addicts often told this researcher, leaving with money is not an option. Dr. Schull goes on to say, I came to realize that to fully understand what was motivating people to play machines in increasing numbers and what was addicting some of them, I had to learn not only about what was going on inside individual gamblers, but also what was going on inside the machines they were playing. To that end, she expanded the scope of her research and began interviewing engineers, designers, and marketers of gambling technologies in their labs and at major trade conferences like the Global Gaming Expo. In such settings, the aim of technology design is no secret. How to get people to play longer, faster, and more intensively. Amongst themselves, game developers and marketers freely discuss how they can better harness technology to keep gamblers seated, quote, and this is from the engineers of the machine, for as long as humanly possible, as one designer put it. Every feature of gambling machines, mathematical structure, visual graphics, sound dynamics, seating and screen ergonomics is geared to increase time on device and encourage gamblers to quote, play to extinction, as the industry jargon goes. In other words, until their funds are completely depleted. While gamblers talk about the zone of continuous play flow, game developers talk about continuous gaming productivity. Machines are designed to match up more and more perfectly with certain human fallibilities, and in some cases, vulnerabilities. Their ability to do this has increased exponentially. Today's machines are a far cry from the one-armed bandits whose primary role in the 1950s and 1960s was to occupy the female companions of gamblers who were playing table games. Instead of handles and reels, the devices have buttons and screens. Instead of coins, they take player credit cards. And instead of a few games per minute, hundreds can be played. Instead of actual reels, they have virtual reels that rely on complicated algorithms whose workings few people in the gambling industry itself understand, much less policymakers or citizens considering these machines in their own communities. If we actually look at what these algorithms are doing, it's a kind of high-tech version of weighting the deck or loading the dice, which no self-respecting casino would ever think of doing. But unlike casino table gambling, in which traditional card games with transparent rules are adapted to include a house edge, gambling machines descend from carnival games, whose workings have always been played against the house, have always included deception, and have always been concealed in a box. Given that such devices are driving the industry, it makes sense that we should open them up to the same kind of public scrutiny directed at other consumer products, like toys imported from China. Dr. Schull goes on to say, legislators involved in the decision to expose citizens to these machines and draw on their revenue to augment the state budget should make sure they understand how these machines work. Just as it is a mistake to view all forms of gambling as homogeneous in nature, potency, and effect, it would be a mistake to treat all gambling machines as alike. Dr. Schull, after describing these machines, goes on to give us the statistics, because I know I'm going to interrupt the reading to address the arguments that the people who support this conference committee report will make. They'll talk about how most people don't get addicted, and they'll also talk about how people can get addicted to other things. But Dr. Schull goes on to say, large epidemiological studies in Australia and Canada have estimated that problem gamblers lose 17 times as much money as other patrons, generating 42 to 53% of the net machine revenues. A study in Nova Scotia was surprised to find that 50% of regular machine players gambled problematically, generating 80% of revenue from machines. The money is coming from the addicts, and the addicts are getting addicted to the technology of the slot machine. I'm going to read one last paragraph. The discussion around problem gambling and pathological gambling tends to focus on what might be wrong with individual gamblers. The fact that some might come into the world more susceptible than others to developing addictions, a fact that is not in dispute here, does not mean that it isn't important to also consider the fact that some machines come into the world better prepared to addict those who engage with them. Mr. Speaker, I took the time, and your time, with all due respect, to read this important testimony about slot machines. I know that I have colleagues for whom I have great respect who care as deeply as I do about addiction, but have argued that people are going to get addicted. They'll get addicted to alcohol. They'll get addicted to other kinds of gambling. And so this really is okay, so long as we put some money into gambling addiction. Mr. Speaker, I respectfully reject that argument. This isn't just like alcohol. It's more like crack cocaine and heroin. And we certainly could probably raise some revenue by legalizing those drugs. And we could probably put some people to work. It's not just rhetoric when we talk about the slot machine being the crack cocaine of gambling. It is uniquely addictive, it is designed to addict, and the majority of the profits come from the addicted gamblers to this highly addictive technology. It is true that most people who go to gamble at the casinos or at the slots or at the racetrack won't become addicted, but most of the profits will come from the addicted people. And this machine that we're about to put 2,500 out there is like setting up crack cocaine shops all over. Now, part of me can respond to a libertarian argument. And if we want to make all drugs legal and say all behaviors can be legal so long as we can get revenue, fine. But I want it to be clear that this conference committee report is about introducing thousands of machines into the Commonwealth that is not just like alcohol, it is not just like horse racing. This is an industry that is predatory, which is to say it is founded on playing to people's vulnerabilities, exploiting those vulnerabilities, and then we're all going to rest our local aid and everything else on it. This is a terrible mistake, I believe. This is a terrible direction for the Commonwealth to be moving in today. And I urge people to reject this conference committee report and not damage forever Massachusetts culture.